And now for the second part of our symposium, I would like to introduce Kathleen Kioussopoulos. She has been with CTN from the beginning. What's that now, 6 years? Yeah. And she will moderate the rest of the program for you.
Okay, thanks, Buddy. You know what Buddy forgot to mention when he was introducing or talking about the background to this whole thing is he had the 10 of us, and it's like herding cats, you know, because we're all spread out across the country. We're all talkie coordinators, and, you know, he keeps us all together and he keeps things moving. So thank you, Buddy, for always being there, and thank you for putting this together tonight. It's really fabulous. You know, we're trying to tailor this to the needs of the coordinators that, you know, we're all a part of this site-based research. And one of the things that we're challenged with is trying to figure out what's the best format and what's the best thing to do and how can we make this interesting and useful to you all. And I think Dr. Newby's talk was absolutely fabulous, and I thank her for that because I did learn some things. And this next part, we're kind of going to shift gears a little bit and talk about quality at clinical trial sites. So the question we posed as a group was, you know, what are we looking for and when you're selecting a site? What are sponsors looking for? What are CROs looking for? What are AROs looking for? And also, we've included obviously the FDA because it's important to us as sites to know. As far as FDA is concerned, what are considered quality sites. And we've actually converted this into a project that we submitted to the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative. It's a national initiative that the FDA is part of and Duke is part of, and there's a lot of industry partners in that initiative. So we submitted to them a proposal to really define quality in clinical trial sites. It's something that's not been done. We're all treated the same. Regardless of if you're a high performer or a low performer, you do the same things over and over and over again. So we're trying to help the sites that are low performers become high performers, and the sites that are high performers be recognized and hopefully go through less hoops when they start trials. So that's a little introduction to why we picked this topic tonight. And with that, I'd like to introduce our panel. I'm going to just introduce everybody, ask them all to come up, and then each one's going to individually do their 5 minutes, 5 slides, and then at the end we'll do kind of a question and answer. So I'm going to introduce you to Lisa Prcela she's a project manager with C5 Research at the Cleveland Clinic. Melissa Holbrook, who's a senior director for site management, and she's head of the U.S. partner sites for Quintiles. We have Dr. Leslie Ball here tonight from the Office of Compliance in the CEDAR in FDA. And in representing a site network representative is Clinical Trials RX, Michael J. So I'd like to thank our panelists for taking the time and also for you all for being here. With that, I'll have Lisa start with her portion.
Hello, Lisa. I work with, excuse me. Can you hear me now? I work with C5 Research, and it's part of Cleveland Clinic, and we're an ARO. And I'm going to go over what an ARO looks for when selecting a site. What is an ARO? ARO is an academic research organization, and we provide academic and operational support and coordination for the management of multi-center clinical trials. What's a little bit different about us is the majority of our staff does have clinical expertise anywhere from 15 to 30 years. Our staff includes physicians, nurses, and other research personnel. A lot of us have, a majority of us have an average of 15 years of clinical research experience or academic research experience. Important factors when choosing a site. We look for, when we're first looking for sites, we receive a protocol. When we're looking at the protocol, we kind of narrow down what type of site are we looking for. We'll narrow it down to the type of physician group that we're looking for. And what we do is we'll look through our database, depending on what type of trial it is. We have a database of many sites that we worked with in the past, and then we will send them an invite. First, one of the most important things that we look for is quality and compliance. We're looking for sites that have performed very well in the past with compliance with GCPs, federal regulations, and SOPs. We'd look to see, do they have SOPs? Do they have processes in place? How does their organization run? We also ask them, some of the questions that we ask is, have they had an FDA inspection? And were they issued any 483s? We kind of look further into why did they receive the 483 and ask for a little bit more information on that. It's real important to evaluate if that 483 was for, if that site staff is still there, if the site really understands why the 483 was issued, and what did they do to resolve the problem that they've had in the past. We ask for further information. Did they develop some SOPs or a site process or policy and procedures after that 483 was issued? We work directly with the sponsors, and we also look to see what does the sponsor want, with the study. What is their expectations? And when we're looking for the sites, we do look in their history that we've worked with them before, their adherence to the protocol. We work very closely with the sites with site management and speak to a lot of the research coordinators, and we get to know them very well after speaking with them several times a week, a lot of them. So we kind of get an idea of, what the sites are like. We do look at the quality of their past recruitment and retention. Not always, we don't always look at the numbers, but we look at the quality. Sometimes, you can have a site that's a very high enroller, but do they keep the patients in the study for the duration of the trial? Is there a prevention of loss to follow-up, and are they compliant with keeping their patients on study drug in a timely manner, with the visits? Also, we look for, it's very important to have clean and accurate data and timely query resolution. A research study is not, it's not too helpful to analyze a research study without quality data. That's the most important part, of the trial in addition to, all the quality. And then we look for site compatibility with the trial. We look at the protocol, what type of trial is this, and the sites that we are approaching, we look to see, are they performing in similar trials? Are there competing trials? If there's competing trials and we don't think that they're going to enroll too many because there's others going on at the same time, an example is acute coronary syndrome. Some sites have 3-4 trials with acute coronary syndrome, and some of them have acute enrollment, some have post-ACS enrollment. So we kind of evaluate what's going on at the site in addition to the other things. We also look at the specialty and the patient population. If the protocol is looking for acute enrollment of inpatients, we want to make sure, does the site have access to the hospital to look for those patients? Do they have to order medical records and wait for the medical records to arrive, or can they go directly to the hospital and look at those records and go to the units and look for the patients in the acute setting? We do ask the sites what their goals are, what their just general clinical research goals are for their site, why they want to participate in the study, and kind of look further into how things run at their site. But we also look at barriers too. There can be many barriers depending on the site. If we're looking for a trial where there's frequent follow-up, maybe every month, if the patients come back, if it's a hospital where the majority of the patients are 15, 30, 50 miles away, maybe that's not a good, fit for that site. We kind of look into little, things like that, barriers that can happen. We also look at the site's interest. Have they participated in meetings? Have they worked with us before? How was the communication with them? But most important is the PI's interest too. It's very important to see, is the PI interested in the compound if it's a drug study? Are they excited about it? Are they, if the site and the PI is excited about the trial and the compound, they're more likely be more excited about participation in the study for the reasons of development of that drug. More important is also is the site resources. We look with our feasibility questionnaires or our invitations, we do ask for research experience. We tend to select more sites that have more experience. We also look to see if there's backup staff. We sometimes ask about their training. And a lot of the sites we know very well and we speak to all the time, so we kind of know their names, the coordinators by their names and by the sites. And if they don't have, if they're fairly new research coordinators, we just ask more information on where did they receive their training certificates. We look at their SOPs, just a little bit further into that. We also look into time commitment. If this is a trial that we want to enroll very quickly and there's short timelines, we always look at the timelines with that and to see if can the site help us out with this trial. Some sites it may take a little bit longer to get up and running with contracts and budgets. If it's a local IRB, sometimes it takes a little bit longer for IRB approvals. And we look at the timelines and compare what's a good match with the site. And facilities and equipment is also very important. With the day and age of electronic case report forms, we have to assess, do they have a computer? That also kind of fits in with the budget. If they don't have the computer or the DSL hookup or whatever that is needed, that can be another barrier, with the site. In addition to freezers, if this study involves a lot of sub-studies, and we evaluate, can they participate in that? Are they interested in participation? And we look into things like the freezers and the equipment and the exam rooms and see how they can help us with that. But we also look into the screening process. We ask more information on how do you find these patients? Who finds the patients? Is it just one person? Is it the study coordinator? Does the PI actually go out and look? Are they searching for patients too? Are they going directly to the patients to evaluate the patient's medical records, or do they depend on referrals first? Some sites depend, if it's a specialty, it's a cardiology trial, maybe it's an internal med site, and they depend solely on cardiology referrals. We kind of look into how close do they work with a cardiologist? Will this be a good fit for this cardiology trial? I'm going to go into what makes a quality site. After working with many different sites, there's a lot of great qualities that we found just from meeting new people and working with different sites all over the United States. But the most important thing is protocol adherence. We review the monitoring reports, before we speak to our sites. We review everything that's going on as we're doing our site management. We look at the deviation history. We look at the queries. We look at how things are going at the site. PI involvement is very important. Some of the best sites that I've had, the PI would be involved with every direct communication with the coordinator every day, constantly communicating with ancillary staff, trying to get referrals, really holding informational meetings to kind of keep everybody up to date. And those are really great sites where we have the PI involvement and excitement, and they're really in for the research and the development of the trial. And we look for the quality of the subjects, not always quantity. If we're looking for to enroll in a trial, yes, you can enroll 50 people maybe in a month, but in the long run, are all 50 of those people going to stay in the trial? Are they really looking for the correct patients for the trial? A good fit, somebody who, like the example I said, where the patient lived further away, will they be able to come in and looking for prevention of loss to follow-up. So quality is way more important than quantity. We look for responsible and dedicated staff. When we speak to the sites frequently, you kind of get a feel for who's really excited about the trial, and I really appreciate those coordinators who call me all the time. I love that because you know that they're really thinking and they're really looking into things really closely, and I always tell them it's always better to ask than not to ask. So the communication and rapport with the study team and within their own group is a very great quality. We look for, like I said, with the feasibility questionnaires, we do look for educated, experienced, and organized staff. And we also look for the daily trial management. We look for detail-oriented sites, and we do love the communication with the sites to try to get to know them and get to see how things are running. And then that way we can develop that rapport with them and help them the best we can too. So we do a lot of direct site management, and it can help with the trial with offering the clinical expertise with any of their clinical questions. That's about all I have. Thank you.
She had me already up there. So Lisa did a phenomenal job in kind of capturing everything that I was going to say, so I think I'm already done. Yay! It's always nice to follow someone who does your presentation for you, right? The other thing is I'm of the age where I can't see with my glasses on or with them off, so you may have to bear with me if I kind of stare off into space a little bit. So I'm Melissa Holbrook. I'm a senior director at Quintiles, and I'm thrilled to be here tonight to share my ideas about what a quality site looks like, and then also give you a little bit of a preview of how we measure quality within our partner site program as well. So when Buddy asked me to pull this presentation together, I said, okay, what do you really want to know? And one of the questions that he sent to me was, what factors most influence your decision when choosing a site to participate in a study? So this is kind of our site ID strategy. It's a very generic site ID strategy. But we do look at past performance. We like to look in the specific indication that we're trying to identify sites for, but that's not always possible. I mean, our sponsors are getting very creative with indications these days, so we may not have delivered a study in the last 5 years or 8 years in that particular indication. So then we go down to the therapeutic area and really understand what sites we have with that therapeutic capability and how well have they performed in the past. What's the overall recruitment in terms of total patients that they've delivered in that therapeutic area or indication, and recruitment rate? How quickly did they get them onto the study, and were they able to sustain that over time? The patient population and access of these sites that we want to go to, we want to know their patient pathway. How are they going to get these patients into their sites? Are they already there? If they are already there, what's their recruitment strategy? And I put SRAP. That's a Quintilesism. So it's a site recruitment action plan. We want to know how you're going to recruit these patients. And then if that first strategy doesn't deliver, what's your contingency plan? And if you have a contingency plan, we love that. Because you can't always, fit a square peg into a round hole when it comes to patient recruitment. So understanding that there may be challenges along the way, and these are the things you would implement at certain intervals. Looking at regulatory and contract turnaround times, I think everyone in the industry kind of looks at those. And the reason is because we want sites that can help us meet our customers' needs in getting first patient in, because that's a huge milestone for them, right? We want to understand site resourcing and any resourcing challenges that they may be undergoing at the time. Known past quality or operational issues. We want to know, have they delivered for us in the past, and what was the quality of the outcome from what they delivered. And then partner site status. So we do have a partner site program. It is a global program, and I represent the North American portion of that program. And we do give a priority status in terms of our site selection to our partner site organizations, and the reason is because they have known delivery excellence. So what are the key site benchmarks for us? Well, past performance. I'm kind of repeating myself, aren't I? So past performance is really important. So we look at recruitment rates, total recruitment. We look at regulatory document cycle times, contract cycle times, and then there again, site selection visit to first patient in. Now, there's a big debate going on right now of what should we really measure in terms of that startup metric. Having been a research coordinator in a past life, I recognize that there are some things that are beyond the site's control. There may be delays on the sponsor side with your contracts. There may be delays within a CRO, within your regulatory document review. There may be delays at your IRB, and all of that's beyond your control. What is within the site's control is getting that first patient in. So knowing that patient pathway, having a recruitment strategy in place, and then able to drive that first patient in, that's a good metric that the sites can actually control. Volume of potential patient population to consider for screening. So what's the patient funnel? Have you heard that term before, the funnel? Because when you start looking at your patient population, you have this huge patient population that you can pull from, but then when you start looking at the inclusion-exclusion criteria, your funnel gets smaller and smaller, doesn't it? And that's where your recruitment action plan comes into play, is how are you going to go from this large patient population down to what truly meets inclusion-exclusion criteria, and then how are you going to deliver those patients on the projects? And then location. Location of our sites does make a difference, because we want to make sure that we're being good corporate stewards for our customers, which is large pharma. And so we're also looking at ways to create efficiencies for them. If we have CRAs that are closer to some sites and then we have one site that's an outlier, we may not choose that site that's in a very, very rural area if we're able to, sorry, I talk with my hands. Everybody awake? If we're able to deliver the study with sites that are actually closer to our resources. So then Buddy asked me to talk about what a quality site looks like, and I can't do that without talking about what the issues look like first, right? So within our company, we have a role called a Site Visit Report Reviewer, or SVRR. And what these folks do is they look at the CRA reports and they trend things. I think that's a really boring job myself, but don't let that leave this room. I'll deny it. But what they do is they actually tell us a lot about where issues are with our sites. And as you can see, these are kind of our top 12 categories that we've been able to focus on. Action items, and what I mean by action items are action items that are unresolved over 2 visits or more, right? So as a study coordinator, make sure that if your CRA leaves action items at your site, that you're resolving those in a time frame that's acceptable. One of the other high ones is the principal investigator conduct. Is that PI available? Has he appropriately delegated responsibilities to the staff at the site? Is he involved in the decision-making process? Is he involved in the consenting process? So PI conduct is another big one. Protocol deviation is the one that by far jumps right off the page at you, doesn't it? And that one is specific to study procedures, right? So not following through or completely omitting study procedures. I mean, the PI signs that he will conduct the study based on the protocol and the way it's developed, and by omitting study procedures or not putting them in the appropriate windows is considered a high-risk indicator for quality. One of the other ones is serious adverse event and safety reporting. So are you reporting things appropriately and with the time frames that are designated? So I thought that kind of puts it in context, right? So these are the 12 top things that we've considered key risk indicators for quality. So then what does a quality site look like to us? Again, good past performance with low volume of protocol deviations. Remember, that was the highest one on the list. Processes, not necessarily firm SOPs, but at least a strong informed consent process, that everyone at the site is able to deliver the same process with consistency. Effective source documentation processes and availability of those records, AE and SAE reporting process, and IP accountability process. That was another one on the previous slide where we had a high key risk indicator rate. Responsiveness to action items and queries, again, we've already talked about that the site's ready to be monitored when the CRA goes on site, that you have an engaged and involved PI, And then some of the other things that we consider part of a quality assessment would be that they're resourced appropriately and that they have low staff turnover. If there's high volume of staff turnover a long period of time, that's a red flag. Engaged in discussions around what can be done differently. We like to get into conversations with sites, particularly in the Partner Site Program, where we can deliver honest and open feedback to the site, but we also want that open and honest feedback. And we actually, are able to have that open exchange. Willingness to accept constructive feedback, and notice I said constructive feedback, and appropriately trained and managed staff, both in general as well as protocol-specific training. And Dr. Newby in her presentation talked about 3 rights, right? It was, I even wrote it down, the right treatment for the right person at the right time. Well, we also have the 3 rights. We're looking for the right site with the right patients and the right study. So our right sites, we want, I guess a right site would be able to make the right introductions, have a right staffing pattern, and have the right attitudes in order to deliver the right patients. Obviously, because we all have the same goal, which is project success, right? We all want to get those drugs on the market. We all want to make those treatment options available for our patients. So again, I didn't talk to Dr. Newby before the presentation. It was kind of cool that we both have the 3 rights. So I wanted to end with this slide because I think that's key and it's important. Asking someone to define a quality site, it's all in how the individual person defines quality. And we can debate that all day long because everyone in the room may have your own perceptions of what we decide is good quality site metrics. But I just wanted to share this slide with you. I try to throw this in every presentation that I give because I think it's just a really neat slide. Kind of keeps things in perspective for everyone. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Leslie Ball. I'm from the FDA and the Center for Drugs, and it's located within the Office of Compliance, and we're the part of the FDA that actually writes the warning letters and does the enforcement action. So the field conducts the inspections and will issue the 43, but we're the ones that get that information back and then we'll decide whether or not an enforcement action needs to take place. And the one thing that I found gratifying in listening to Lisa and Melissa is that you're not going to hear anything really new or different from me. And I think that's a great thing because I think what you all think is important in a site is actually what the FDA thinks is important in a site. And the other thing that I heard echoed was the city, and actually in March of this year I became one of the city board members, CTTI, and I think that you're hopefully what you'll see is that the FDA actually is really interested in hearing from you and partnering and contributing into the conversation about what constitutes quality in clinical trials. I have my email here. I welcome emails from you. I'm a public servant, and that's what I do. This slide I took from Ann Meeker O'Connell. She spent almost 10 years in QA and monitoring for pharma, biotech industry, as well as a consultant. And you'll see echoes of this. You've heard echoes of this, some of the same issues about what factors influence a sponsor selection of potential clinical investigator sites. You'll see echoes of this in terms of enforcement actions, what things if there are problems, can lead to an enforcement action. And I don't want to repeat them because you've heard, I think, almost all, if not all of these things before by the 2 previous speakers. But the one thing that I wanted to stress, and I know I heard Melissa talk about staff turnover, and it's been our experience in looking at quality at the sites is that staff turnover is a really can be a difficult thing. It's both at the sites as well as the monitors. And one recent example, there was a monitor who missed a plane flight, couldn't get on another plane flight. To a site, so that site missed monitoring for 2 months. That site enrolled all the subjects, almost all the subjects within that time frame, but they completely missed on what the primary efficacy endpoint was. So it's it is something that's important both from the standpoint of a monitor as well as from the staff. But we also know that if you have a great study coordinator, we've seen the case where the study coordinator is great. She leaves, there's no one to pick up the slack, again, problems can be seen. The other thing I wanted to stress here is in the quality indicators is well-designed standard operating procedures, and I emphasize that are known by the staff and that are followed by the staff, because we've also seen great SOPs, but the staff either didn't know about them or didn't follow them. So if you're a site, you're going to want to know what leads us to select your sites. And there are really two main reasons, but the majority of inspection sites historically are done based on enrollment. So you're conducting a trial, that data is submitted in a new drug application that comes to the FDA, and now we're going to validate the data. And you're most likely going to be a high enrolling site, and that's a good thing. There also can be, and then that's about 2/3 of our clinical investigators are selected that way. We also look at the data, and as issues arise during the review, we can also choose sites on that basis. What we also do is we take complaints in from anybody and everybody. Sponsors, institutions, IRBs, study staff will complain to the FDA, and about 1/3 of our clinical investigator sites are complaint-driven. But within our metric or our methods of how to select sites, we're actually shifting that. And it was a very qualitative approach previously, but we're shifting over to a more quantitative approach. So within the last year and a half, we've been developing a risk-based tool, and I think I heard from, Quintiles has a type of tool that they use to look at sites and looking at trends. And this particular risk-based site selection tool looks at applications in 3 ways and picks out risk parameters that we think trend could be issues that we want to look at more closely. So we select sites, and this is in pilot. We've so far loaded, I think, 5 applications, NDAs, into the tool, and we're hoping to learn from this process in the pilot and then adapt this. And the one thing I want to say is that you can look at these things. They may be in the tool in the first iteration, but we consider this an adaptive tool. So just when you actually think you've got it down, we'll change it. And at the clinical site level, there are things like enrollment, but also includes investigator complaints and inspection history. With respect to factors that are associated with FDA enforcement actions, I think you've heard some of these things before, but one of the things I want to emphasize is that sponsors can delegate their responsibilities to CROs. Investigators under the FDA regulations cannot delegate their responsibilities. And so FDA will hold them accountable if it's a problematic sub-investigator or unqualified staff at the site. So these are the things that in a review of our warning letters or disqualifications we have cited. Failure to supervise, failure to protect the rights and safety, so that would be things like enrolling ineligible subjects, failing to monitor for adverse events. In addition, things like submitting false information to the FDA, the sponsor, those are things that can get an investigator disqualified. There are also issues such as failing to follow the investigational plan and failing to maintain accurate records. And what matters is, and I think we get this question a lot, it's not just a violation or failing to follow the protocol, it's what impact does that have? And so Rachel Berman, who's one of my colleagues at the FDA, points to a cardiovascular endpoint trial where the endpoint is death. Yet the F483 cites a site for a hemoglobin, failing to transcribe a hemoglobin. You might say that hemoglobin may or may not be important, but we look at when we're deciding on enforcement actions is what matters to subject safety and to data reliability. And the last thing I wanted to mention here is failing to follow up or correct problems identified by the monitors. The monitors may find problems, they issue queries, and what we don't like to see is that at the time of inspection, they haven't been followed up. And lastly, how do we measure success? Well, I think from your standpoint, you want to avoid a 483, but as I said, they're simply observations, and they're really not necessarily going to mean an enforcement action. So how do we decide on whether or not we need to issue a warning letter or initiate an investigator disqualification? Those are things that impact data integrity or the right safety and welfare of the subjects. And I think I'm going to echo Melissa in indicating that the key metric is, at the end of the day, is approval of safe and effective drugs, things that are given to your patients, that you take yourself and that your family members take. That's all I have.
In addition to what's already been said, we have a third group of people that we have to present ourselves to from the site, and that is the trial subject. If you notice here, the approval rating of the pharmaceutical industry is right underneath the automobile, just a couple notches above tobacco and oil. So at the site level, we have to deal with this image, and so our first kind of client is the prospective subject. We want to make sure that the subject is treated from the moment, from the voice on the phone all the way through to the thank you for participating card that we mail out to everyone that participates in a trial at one of our sites. Our second group that we have to show ourselves off to are the sponsors and CROs. As everyone has said before, they're looking for the big three: enrollment, quality. So from the beginning of any trial, we will always do a systematic study feasibility. Now, the information that's kind of gotten cut off the bottom is based on survey data from the Site Solutions Summit that we take from about 100 or so research sites and put them through a long survey and come up with answers on what percentage of you are doing a systematic study feasibility on every trial you get. And you can see always 52%, often, seldom, and never. 12% of a systematic feasibility, meaning do you go through a multi-page form and ask the right questions about the trial you're presented with? Not just do we have the patients, but how are you going to get them? Would a patient want to be in a study like this? How long do you think they would stay in? What do you expect to be your screen fill rate? And before you accept the trial. Because what happens when you don't is you end up like the 50% or so of sites that enroll 0 or 1 patient. And so that's why we conduct a study feasibility that's very thorough, because we don't want to end up down there, because then we won't be selected for the next trial. As you can see here, 15% of sites never enroll a single patient, 30% underperform, 20% is our average, and then you've only got the 30% that are at the top that enroll 70%, and that's where we would like to be. So then our final client is the FDA, and you can see right here as who do investigators believe is responsible for compliance failures, and it's the big green stack is the coordinator. So at our sites, before any investigator can join our network, they have to go through 24 hours of training to understand what it is they're responsible for, because you would be surprised how many of them, I mean, this is highly accurate. Oh, that's the coordinator's fault. It is not. Their name is all over everything, and it's their responsibility for their oversight at the trial at that location. So in addition to the coordinator and investigator training that we do, we make sure that all the Alcoa principles are followed by the coordinators at all time, because we don't want to be audited, but I can tell you, if you haven't been audited by the FDA, you are not ready. Our former compliance officer was an FDA investigator, and she really helped us with our SOPs and showed us what it was like, to have their perspective on your site at all the time. And they really don't see your site as, with us, no offense, as people there. They see they see numbers and rules and statistics, and they're charged to follow those, and they're very good at it. Our compliance officer, she was a very formidable and strict woman, and I married her. So yeah, she can quote everything from the Code of Federal Regulations at all times, and so having that benefit was very good to us, because now we know at all times what we have to do in case the FDA shows up. And the Alcoa principles are data that's attributable, if you didn't know, legible, contemporaneous, original, and accurate. Our coordinators know that they have to complete all their paperwork immediately, because every minute you miss by not documenting something that you did, you are going to forget and forget and forget. So there's my 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
was great, thank you. I just want to open invite everybody that when we're done here, we're going over to the wedding, the reception that you hear next door. I think it's going to be fabulous. I'm just hearing the boom between that and the Limp Bizkit concert or whatever is next door, so. Alice in Chains. All right, so we'd like to open it up for your questions now. The reason we kept them so brief, and they all did a fabulous job of giving us exactly what we wanted with just the real brief 5 minutes, 5 slides. And now the most important part, I thought, would be having everybody have the option of asking some questions. So please wait for your mic and ask away.
I want Mr. J's SOPs. Send them to CTNBestPractices.org.
Okay.
I have a question that I will direct to all 4 of you, and my question is, I'm right here. We have had monitors present us with monitoring reports that are incredibly inaccurate for the events that happened during the monitor visit. We've asked to have them redact because they'll say things are missing that have been there. They'll say they discussed this or that with the coordinator and they didn't. Or the monitoring seems so shoddy that they aren't even looking for the consent, which is right there. They'll say the consent is missing, et cetera, et cetera. What is your advice to us out in the grasslands when we have inaccurate monitoring letters that are used by you to judge us for future trials?
I'll start. What I would recommend is that you escalate it. You know, if you're not feeling that you're getting an accurate reflection of the activities at the site, escalate it to the CTL on that project. You have, and you're not getting anywhere. Then I would find out who the line manager is for the CRA. I mean, there's 2 sides to every story, right? And it's understanding that maybe there's a training gap with the CRA. Maybe it's that the line manager needs to go on site with the CRA and make an assessment themselves. We or at least I try very hard, is you're innocent until proven guilty, not the other way around, right? So there's always going to be differences of opinion, but it's trying to get to the source of the disconnect. And if you're not getting anywhere with the CTL, now I hear myself, I would try the project manager, and if you're not getting anywhere from a project basis, then escalate it to the CRA's line manager. I mean, that's just my suggestion.
Yeah, I'd love to hear FDA.
Yeah, I think from the standpoint of what we like to see in terms of documentation, if the monitor is asking for something, we like to see a response. And so if the response is there and it looks accurate, then we take that, regardless of whether or not the monitoring report keeps saying you're missing this, you're missing that. If the response from the site is that, here's the information and it's there, we do take that into consideration. But I do again caution you, because again, the field investigators, by and large, they're on the front lines. They're doing a great job, but they also are stretched very thin, and their level of expertise may vary. So they may be doing manufacturing one week and then a clinical site the next, and so they may or may not see all of that. But as I can say, so. What you get in a 43 is an observation. Whether or not we take an enforcement action, we look at everything they collect, all those papers they ask you to copy. We look at that and we make a decision about whether or not to move forward with an enforcement action. So it's like the whole package. It's not just one thing that will decide whether or not any serious action will take place after an inspection.
Next, we'll have back here.
Okay, when you're evaluating potential sites, right here.
Hello.
How much importance do you give for certification for the study coordinators and the PIs? Where does that fit in, if all?
Did somebody plant him from the last session I was in? So we actually had this discussion actually in the last session that I was in with Christine actually over what credibility does certification actually give from a CRO's perspective. It shows that you're committed. And it shows that you've taken the next step in taking your certification to the next step. But is it important in the actual site selection? I can't say that today it weighs heavily on a decision of a site selection, a certified PI versus not. But it definitely speaks to your commitment to the overall industry and delivering good quality clinical research.
I'll comment from our standpoint is that, it's not always, there is not, believe it or not, a regulatory requirement for specific training or for a certification. The regs only say that, there needs to be adequate from the investigators' training and experience, and likewise the monitors have to be qualified by training and experience, but it's not further specified. So there isn't a requirement for certification. That said, I think that, when we do see a lot of problems, we look to see at the site level training. And we are interested in actually data that would help us to correlate whether or not certification improves site quality or whether or not lack of certification correlates with increased risking site, because then we could put that in the risk model and we could select the sites where there is not training. So and I was in an earlier session today for the APPI luncheon, and I'm aware that Citi is actually looking at the issue of site certification and whether or not there's a correlation with quality. So we will be looking at those data.
That's our project we submitted. That's exactly what we're looking at, is we propose that if we did come up with some kind of certification process for the site level, that would that impact, would that, would be able to correlate that with quality. And I think we're interested as sites as being able to discern that ourselves, and it not only for the sites that are already doing a good job, but to help a new site come on board and know where to go with their quality. So we're glad to hear it's important.
Sorry to change the subject. About the use of protocol deviations as a metric. I understand why that's useful, but to me, protocol deviations is kind of like adverse events was a while back, as far as how you track them and what meaning they have. And I wonder if it'd be, I think the industry ought to find a way to rate them as far as significance goes, because in some cases it becomes meaningless. I don't know if you understand what I mean, but.
We look at the trend of deviations. If we see it occur, of course, you may have, an occasional deviation, but if we see it happening over and over, subjects getting enrolled that do not meet inclusion/exclusion criteria, it kind of raises a flag that, and we'll reach out to the sites and give them a little bit more education, on that, to educate them more on, to prevent it from happening. We kind of look at the trend, not just just single individual deviation, because that can happen. But if we do see the majority of their subjects being enrolled that do not fit the criteria or the timelines of the criteria, then that does raise a flag.
Can I ask you a question about what you were, I don't have a hot mic. Would you provide that feedback back to the sites post-trial? And say, here's your list of 12, or the list of items that we look for, here's where you fell, and here's the spread.
No, we don't really send a critique to the sites, no. But what we do is proactively educate them as we pick things up. So when we're reading the monitoring reports, that's I kind of like to look at that just to see what's going on at the site, just to educate them. And that's kind of a little bit different than what an ARO does, is we kind of look into the clinical situations and do a lot of proactive education. If we pick up any trends, we go through the clinical scenarios with the sites. Maybe they don't understand certain criteria like EKG criteria, and that's kind of how we stand out a little bit more with the nurses and the physicians in our group, so we can give you the clinical expertise to prevent deviations.
I'd like to comment on that because I remember actually the first warning letter that I reviewed when I was a branch chief, or this was a proposed or draft warning letter, was for it was an oncologist who was conducting a very complicated protocol. It had multiple visits, multiple labs, and the basis of the warning letter was protocol deviations, essentially, but failing to follow the protocol. But I'm a clinician, and I looked at this, and they were things like the infusion time was 55 minutes instead of 50 minutes, and over again. And I just looked at this, and I said, we're not sending a warning letter to this investigator. This is within the realm of clinical practice. So, my answer to that is we focus, at least with the enforcement action, is on what matters. Is it something important in terms of subject safety Or is it an issue with respect to data reliability? We issued a warning letter within the last couple weeks. The basis of it, was to a sponsor, but it was relative to problems that were at sites that had to do with dosing of pediatric patients with a particular study medication that has significant adverse events. That's a protocol violation. That matters. So if you're worried about, what's going to lead to enforcement action, focus on what matters, at least from the FDA standpoint.
In regards to protocol deviations, again, I mean, most sites try to do the best job they possibly can do. I mean, nobody goes into this without trying to do the right thing, but there's a big issue with the sponsors coming to the sites a lot of times towards the end of the study saying, oh, by the way, you didn't do this, this, and this, and it's not in the protocol. It's a very vague description in the protocol. It doesn't specifically say this. They expect the sites then to submit to their IRB all these protocol deviations. Then the IRB comes back and says, that's a red flag. What the hell is going on? I mean, really, when you think of it, we're very, very busy. I mean, the job is continuous. As you know, I mean, the life of, at the sites is crazy sometimes. But when you look at it, the sponsor a lot of times puts this excessive pressure on sites, coming up with these protocol deviations that when the IRB looks at it says, this is crazy, this is not a protocol deviation, this is an interpretation by the sponsor. It's not necessarily something you've done wrong, but this happens over and over again from multiple sponsors. It's not necessarily one. It's something, and I don't know if it's as they get towards the end or going through the trial, they realize they change their mind. Instead of doing an amendment and changing the protocol to what they want, they slap all this on you, and it's a lot of work. And it's very frustrating because we haven't done anything wrong. It's the sponsor's interpretation of things. And so sometimes, it really, you need to stop and think what you're doing when the monitors are coming and saying, oh, you have to do this, this, and this because it wasn't exact. Or, now all of a sudden, after the study's just about over, your patients have all been enrolled, and they come back and say, oh, you couldn't do this. It needed to be such and such. So these are kinds of things, they happen. I mean, it's understandable, but you need to consider, I think, sometimes what you're doing when you, come in and these things happen because it's, the whole site is affected by this. Your rapport with your sponsor, with your monitors, with your staff, because they work very hard, and it's very frustrating when you work as hard as you do, and then all of a sudden they're telling you, you did it wrong.
One of the things, just completely agree, having been on the site side for a number of years, been in your shoes and can identify with exactly what you're saying. One of the things that we do use our site visit report reviewers for is to identify trends across projects as well as across sponsors. So if we see a particular project where all sites are having a higher than expected protocol deviation rate, we share that with the sponsor because you're right, it could be protocol clarification that's causing some of those deviations. We also don't use it to identify, okay, your site X and you've got 3 protocol deviations, so we're not going to use you on the next project. What we are able to do is identify the large outliers, those that truly have exceptional rates of protocol deviations, because then there's a systemic failure somewhere in either our monitoring plan or the site's education. So we try to use it as a proactive tool to help make sure that we're able to influence site performance in a more productive and constructive way.
I think it's important with the type of deviation. I mean, if it's something that affects the good clinical practice, like patient signed a consent, but the PI didn't sign it till 2 days later, or we see something major like that that would be affecting the clinical practice, those are the ones, that we kind of narrow in on. I mean, sometimes the creatinine might be 0.1 too high or too low. I mean, those things happen. Sometimes maybe you didn't have the lab or a mistake was made, but we really look at, making sure that they're following the regulations and good policy and procedures, and just kind of looking at the general good clinical practice of how things are done, not really narrowing in on every single deviation.
I think one of the things that I've noticed doing this now for about 12 years is sometimes your deviations and level of data clarifications and things are dependent upon the experience of your monitor. And then there have been more than one time where I've had to actually basically train a monitor, and it's difficult on the site because we don't have the resources for that. And I would be interested in knowing the data, the number of DCFs relative to the length of time the person's been monitoring, and if they have any clinical background to the study. That I have them come on site numerous times. They can't pronounce even the basic clinical terms for the cardiovascular trial that they're doing. And it goes to their, I see them a monitor as a partner, and the monitoring plan should be a collaborative plan that we do together, that I learn from you, you learn from me, and we make this study happen together. But if the monitor that's coming out, I will instantly lose credibility with me if they can't either pronounce it correctly or understand the inclusion criteria to know that a lesion needs to be greater than 30%, not less than 30% to get an intervention or whatever it was. I mean, I've had multiple experiences with that. Anybody else has?
I just wanted to talk about site selection again. I also am a site manager at an ARO, and I was given a list of sites from the sponsor. And I just wanted to, because I was a coordinator for years and years, and the feasibility questionnaire was always the same. And I know there's been some shift to do what you were saying about asking more probing questions as opposed to, you know, do you have the patients? Yes. How many are you going to enroll? 2 a month, you know? So I guess I would direct it to you, like, what are you doing to really find out if a site's qualified? I think the open-ended questions are the way to do it, but it takes more time. But I also feel if you put the time up front, you won't have only 30% of the sites enrolling the most patients. So,
Are you talking specifically about site selection or feasibility?
Well, we base the site selection on the way they answer the feasibility questionnaires. And in my experience, every time I got one over the fax, it was the same questions, you know.
And we're no different today. So, and for those of you that sat in on the last session, sorry that I'm going to repeat a little bit of what I shared there. But, you know, we have a very tactical relationship when it comes to the site ID process. We get a study, we ask you if you have a minus 20-degree freezer, you tell me yes, you get it back, and I do nothing with it. I get another study, I send you another questionnaire asking you the same questions, and I still do nothing with it. So we do have a plan in place to make that process a little bit easier, so we are able to actually ask you the more thought-provoking questions. So we understand the patient pathway to be this. Does this match your site's standard of care? And if not, tell me why, rather than the very tactical questions about your facilities. And this may be the 10th time we've worked with you. We should know what your facilities are.
Right. You shouldn't be asking those same questions again.
Exactly. So we're starting to shift toward that. We're hoping to be able to preview that in fall of this year.
Yeah, only because I had so many sites that wouldn't even respond to me, and you know, I was new at it too. You know, it's for like what you learn from the beginning to the end. I almost wanted to send out my own questionnaire, and then if they didn't answer that, then they were cut off the list. But
we also make follow-up phone calls to discuss it in person, you know, and kind of go through it, because you can say you have you have 5,000 patients with acute coronary syndrome, but how many really fit that protocol?
Exactly.
You know, and are they just writing numbers down, or did they really look into, did they really go through their database and their coding and all that? What kind of effort did they put into putting the numbers, or did they just put the numbers down? So sometimes we'll call and have a post-feasibility questionnaire discussion.
Right, and I think that was a lesson learned from me. You know, as our group, that's what we talked about. Like
Who's filling out the questionnaire?
The next study, exactly, and the next study we get, and the next set of sites we get, how do we handle it? Like, what's our first thing that we do to engage the sites, as opposed to just sending them the invitation?
Exactly.
Right.
Okay. I think we have a question in the back here.
My question is for Leslie. Can you tell me your feelings on note to files? And then what are the do's and don'ts?
What was it?
The note, when we make a note to file. And then what are the do's and don'ts that you would recommend for us?
In terms of notes to files? Well, we do know we're not really dumb. Let me tell you that, in the sense that when we send out a notice that we're going to inspect a site, and then we see all these notes to files that happened like a couple days before we show up. We know that's going to happen to some extent, but in some cases it's a flag. Look here, lots of notes to file. And the other thing about them is that they don't affect ultimately. Sometimes it can be helpful, and so I don't want to say that never use notes to file. But why are you doing them? Is it a lack of a quality process that now you're flagging, and so ultimately, we look to see again what matters. If it's a note to file because a study subject was enrolled inappropriately, and that study subject, and the note to file was, not really documenting anything. What we like to see is that there was some thought given about why that happened. So, for example, this, and not simply the sponsor waiver, but that there was a particular reason why that subject was not enrolled properly. That's more helpful than just a sort of a blanket note to file that covers all the omissions that the monitor picks up or the sponsor picks up that in preparation for an FDA inspection. So I don't know if I can be more specific, but I think that the one thing that you should, if you're finding that you're having lots of notes to file, particularly in preparation for an FDA inspection, then circle back and look at your quality systems to see if you have the proper procedures in place, so that you could hopefully avoid those in the future.
My question, just to all of you, you asked the question to us when you come about, do you have any competing trials? Well, the majority, especially in cardiovascular, they all come out at the same time. So when we're answering that question, it always kind of maybe feel a little shady saying no. Do you know what studies we're doing with other companies or other sponsors?
And they don't always give us a lot of information when you talk about your site feasibility. I always feel like I'm answering this there's this study drug X that may be used in patients with an acute coronary syndrome and type 2 diabetes. So broad. But we don't have a protocol sitting in front of us. Then I get the protocol and find out that they've got to be between 5'2" and 5'4.5", but not, if not, but then for the other. And so, yeah, that takes them out of, maybe I do have that big funnel, but, we're given very little information when we're trying to fill those things out. And so I guess, from our perspective, they're sort of a waste of time.
When I see the competing trials, I usually call the site and get some more information. Yeah, they may all be on the same diagnosis, but maybe one's in follow-up, maybe one doesn't get started yet. So we always call the sites and ask. Maybe some are acutely enrolled and some are enrolled post. 12 weeks post, event. And we kind of take that into consideration too. That doesn't automatically mean that you wouldn't be selected, that you have competing trials. Sometimes it's a good thing because we know you have the expertise in that, certain field. But we do, that usually just prompts a call to further discuss what's going on. We don't just look at the paper and say, you're out. We will call the site to discuss it further and just kind of see what's going on. Maybe you have 10 coordinators and you got competing trials. You'll be able to handle it fine. Just we get a little bit more information from the site. So that doesn't really mean anything, that you would be selected or not. It's just kind of looking further into it.
Now, we've had a surgeon that's had competing trials, and he was already doing one. Sponsor number 2 wanted him to participate in their study, and so they came to an arrangement on what days he would enroll into which study as a solution. But again, it's just another thing on the feasibility questionnaire that you answer without having to provide any proof at all.
Yeah, and with the competing trials, some sites have a schedule. Maybe 1 week they do one trial, the next week they do another trial. So we look into those kind of things too.
But is that, are y'all okay with that as the CRO or the sponsor for that study? Is that okay? Because y'all
we know that there are competing trials out there. You know, what it really boils down to is, are they truly competing? Right? Because you can say that two, you know, atrial fibrillation trials are competing, but if you really look closely at the inclusion-exclusion criteria, they're not identical. So really be careful how you use the term competing trials. I think it's a futile question. That's just my personal opinion. We know that sites are doing other trials in the same therapeutic area indication, but what we would appreciate is for the site to really understand the type of study we want to deliver to you versus the studies that you're currently doing. And if they truly do compete, then be honest with us about that, but don't just make a blanket statement because you've got another AFib trial that it truly is a competing study. I would bet 9 times out of 10 they're not.
Well, and the thing is if you're good, like I know that our site can do ACS trials. So we do get a lot of ACS trials brought to us because that's what we're good at. And I'm not a diabetic center, I'm, you know, heart and vascular. So it's, you know, it's a kind of, like you say, it's a moot point because we are good at that. We will do multiple ACS trials. That's our goal. So,
Right, and we've had several sites too that have 3 or 4 ACS trials going on, and they're doing awesome.
right.
You know, it's just kind of, we just use that as a gauge just to see what's going on at the site, and just to see if that would be a good fit for you.
It
But
should
we
be a
do-
marker for a good site because
For sure.
you're, actually, if you have competing trials, that means
That
you're
means you're
doing
an
well enough
expert.
to have that population, so.
Right.
Now, also, if the sponsor contracts would reimburse the site for early termination at a sufficient amount, maybe the sites wouldn't take 2 competing trials. But as it is, they don't. So if you pick one or the other and it closes and you've hired 3 coordinators to do this project, there you are with your cheese in the wind, I guess.
Any other questions? One more over here.
When you were in spirit with Dr. Ball's comments about what really matters, I understand that feasibility questionnaires, post-mortem after the study's over, key risk indicators for sites such as, they have to be lumped together in aggregate statistics and looked at. Melissa did a great job about explaining how they do trending across projects, therapeutic areas, et cetera. I'm curious to determine whether or not each of your respective organizations assign a weighted value of significance to these metrics, because you can have a consenting deviation at a site that is out of the site's, well, they should QC the document when they make the copy for the subject, but if a subject didn't initial on page 12 of a 30-page consent form, which happens, versus an investigator who did not conduct the consent process or there were no signatures on it whatsoever, there are varying degrees of significance, or protocol deviations, pregnancy tests weren't done, and then subjects get pregnant. So there are various ways of either weighting within your individual category a level of significance, or taking that information and correlating the different types of risk indicators with one another. That happens in an inspection environment. It is hard to do, but we now have the technology to leverage in many organizations to do that effectively. If you could all speak to steps that your organization does to kind of quantitate your data effectively to come to a better outcome with a site that conducts best practices effectively.
We have a database, you know, with the sites that we've worked with, and we know a lot of our sites very well. And we don't really grade, and it's kind of like a grading scale. And, you know, of course there's going to be deviations, but if, you know, if we have a site that the PI didn't sign consents, you know, on everybody, and after being re-educated, continued to do that, well, then that would probably give a flag. But we don't get into the every little detail on grading a site, just the overall, you know, how things were, and you know, after educating, if things got better, some sites end up being an awesome site. You know, if it's a new coordinator, maybe she just needs a little bit more training and a little bit more guidance, and we tend to give them a little bit more guidance and encourage them to call us frequently and you know, welcome their continuous questions, because those are good, because we rather be able to proactively train them and help them out the best we can. So little things like that doesn't automatically throw a site out. We just look at the overall You know, when it's all done, wow, they really did great. You know, we kind of look at the overall how things were.
I have a question for FDA. Our site recently, our IRB is not requiring deviations to be reported. They're actually asking for violations to be reported. And as an FDA, how would you view us not reporting violations? Because now, on the other hand, the sponsors who are monitoring us, who are pointing out our violations, which are if your IVs run, stop too early or too late, those type of deviations they're not interested in. Outside window visits, a patient comes in 2 days after they're required to come in, they don't want to know about that. But they are protocol violations or deviations. If we're not reporting them, what is the FDA view for that? And can sponsors tell us that we don't have to report them only if our IRB is requiring that?
Well, I think first to answer to that is that you will not find the terms of violation or deviation in the FDA regulations. So this is like a sort of a construct that has been built in. What our regs do say is that sites are required to report to IRBs unanticipated problems affecting the risk to subjects or others. And so again, it's sort of the devil's in the details. It's like and I will. You may get a violation cited on a 483, but again, if you're looking at enforcement actions and sort of serious consequences from the FDA, we'll focus on what matters. So a routine kind of deviation that the infusion time was 5 minutes too long or something like that is not going to have the same impact that the subjects were dosed with the incorrect amount and led to adverse events. So I think we get asked these questions a lot because people want us to intervene with sponsors because they said, look, the sponsors or the monitors are requiring this. And sometimes we'll have to point out, well, the regs don't actually state that. This is what they state, and this is how we interpret it. So hopefully that's helpful.
It seems like there should be a standard, like a SOP for that, for everybody to follow the same rule, because it seems like it varies from sponsor to sponsor, and it gets very confusing as far as what's required and what's not.
I think what's so tricky about it is what matters, it differs from protocol to protocol. So it's not always easy to kind of do a one-size-fits-all, and that's probably why it hasn't been done.
Good questions. Anybody else have any other questions? Well, Ken, I'd like to thank all of our speakers tonight. Thank you very much. One other quick thing, please fill out your evaluation, and when you are walking out, if you turn that in, we'll give you your certificate for attendance. And if you have any tools, any ideas that you'd like to share with us and share with each other, please send them in through our website. We do have a lot of good tools out there for you to use. They're all free. As Buddy said, you don't have to log in, and hopefully we'll see you next year. Thanks so much.